Making procedural track for trains is quite a bit more complicated than making the conventional track in trains. And this is the dock railway line, docks with rails set in cobbles, which I'm referring to particularly in this video. And this is a piece of, we're in Gmax, and this is a 5 foot length of the track in cobbles, which I'm using as a fixed track item to help force the geometry of curves in different places. And it's the old style piece of the old style conventional track, and so it has the rails, it has cobbles either side, it has cobbles in the middle. Conventional track, of course, in the sense of a railway, as opposed to conventional track in trains, as opposed to the procedural track. Conventional track would have sleepers and chairs, and of course various other rails added to maintain ensure the flanges of the wagons sticks to the rails. But for this, of course, I've eliminated sleepers, I've eliminated chairs, and just about everything else. So we've just got the rails and the cobbles. Well, that's not going to work for procedural track. So what I've done there is, let's have a look at the breakdown of procedural track, and it's these files here which make up the procedural track. This is the ordinary track here, dock rails and cobbles, and this is the Trainz, so Trainz New Era and Trainz 2019 and onwards. This is the procedural track, and it's a group of files, as you can see there. The key one is the mesh library. The mesh library contains everything that is used to create the track. These are subsidiary folders here. The main folder that actually creates the track is the track folder, and if we look in that, we've just got a config and a thumbnail. And I'm not going to go into that, because if you want to make procedural track, you'll have to crack the vagaries and the idiosyncrasies of the way in which it's put together. But these are basically chairs in the plural, left and right, and rail left and rail right, and sleepers in the plural. Those are the minimum that you can get away with, because what I'm doing here is I'm going to make procedural track from this type of track, but I've got to make a number of other items which I don't need, but which I will force, or not force, but the Trainz will actually put them below ground level. But the built-in procedural track requirements mean that I have to provide items which I don't want to have. So let's have a look in the mesh library. Those are all unneeded, those are all GMW files, I can just delete those. But here you can see all of the different meshes that you need to make up procedural track. You need the blades for the points, left and right. You need a single chair, 2 different level of detail functions. I've actually got them as the same, and chairs on the left and chairs on the right, a single chair rather, then chairs in the plural. Then the check rail, which goes over by the frog, where the frog is created by the procedural track, and end caps to cap the end of the spline. The rail itself in 3 different levels of detail, sleeper as a single, sleepers as multiples, a slide chair, that's basically where the point blade slides across a wider chair than usual, the stretcher or the gauge bearer, which joins the 2 blades together. Now I don't need any of those for the dock track, but I've still got to create something there to satisfy Trainz's requirements. And here the track is actually the ballast, and then we have what they're called is wing rail, which is used to tidy up the rail once it's near the frog. And then we've got 3 animation files for the blades and the stretcher. The stretcher one I'm not using at all. Then we've got the textures. I kept those very small. Cobbles are just 25k, and the rails are just 13k, and those are the texture files for them. So there we are, that's the contents of the mesh library. That's what you've got to create first. So the way I went about it is I took my ordinary pre-procedural, non-procedural track, and then I began to create the elements to fill up that mesh library. So I'm just trying to remember where I put them all now. I think I've put them up here. Procedural rails in cobbles. There we are. So here's my starting point. What I did is I took my basic. This is my basic. Let's just have a look at that, and you can see there that I'd already begun to muck about. So this was my starting point. This was my original non-procedural track, and I made a couple of blades there, and in fact what I did is I imported blades from my broad gauge procedural track, and then just adapted that and redid the mesh for that. But you can see there's a what do you call them, there's a oh, I've forgotten the name of it now. What is it I'm talking about here? It's this one, isn't it? It's a dummy. Quite appropriate, it's a dummy. And so by using these, this was then my starting point. So once I'd got all this sorted, which wasn't very difficult, and I'd got rails and cobbles. The ballast was imported along with a one of the things that I brought in here. You can see there it's actually gone blue because it's lost its texture. I'm not going to save this, I'm just doing this to show you. So, but these were my two textures for making the procedural track. So from this I then went on, keeping that in the same folder, I then went on to, no, we don't want to save it, thank you. I made my left blade, and you can see I've had a couple of goes at it. This is the left blade that the procedural track will use to generate the blade in the turnout or points, which it will create. So let's just have a look at that. This is in, I think we've got texture correct. Yeah. So there it is, and it's centered over the XYZ zeros, and it's got an animation. Let's have a look. There it goes. That's the little animation. It's actually moving about, I think it's only about a few degrees, very few degrees indeed. That then gives us the blade there. You can see the difference between the height of the 0, 0, 0 point and the blade itself, which is, everything is set to the standard Trainz track height. And so using my basic, I then made more and more models derived from it. And so here, for example, is a single chair, which is just those cobbles. Okay, and the chair, which normally sits underneath the track, in the cobbles procedural track has to sit either side, because the cobbles follow the rail around throughout. They're part of the trim. That's the way you set cobbles. So if you want to put a texture down of cobbles and just run rails only over it, then fair enough. If you're happy enough with that, that's great. I prefer to go for the having the cobbles either side of the rail. It looks more realistic, I think. Now, one thing you might notice here is the grid is going over the top, and that's because they're underneath. That single cobble is below ground level, which means it won't show up. It's not at the height required by Trainz, but it means I can hide it. So although it's required by Trainz to operate the procedural, to create the procedural track, I've hidden it away, so I don't want to show it. The reason for that is, if we just go back to my basic one, here we are, and let's just have a look at that, is that I've tried to get this so that it is close to ground level as possible, though I'm actually going to be 3/4 of an inch above the ground level, and I'll explain why shortly. But all of this is at the same height. So we've got the chairs either side, or what's going to be the chairs, and then we've got the track, which is the cobbles in the middle, all at the same height, just below the level of the rail. There's a problem with this though, because this isn't normal sleeper with chairs track. When we try to make, or when I try to make procedural track, that's the royal we, isn't it? They're gonna overlay each other, which means we're going to get some of that flickering texture effect, and I just cannot think of a way of eliminating that. So having created all the different parts I need for procedural track, I then went on to realise that I'd got the gauge wrong on my previous dock rails, so all of the ones that I've already released on my website are wrong. As far as the cobbles are, at least anyway. I've not done anything with the concrete ones yet. So I've done version 2s, and they'll update. They'll KUID 2s. They'll just simply obsolete the previous ones. If you want to download them again when they're available. They're not available yet. The distance was about 1.4. Let me get that right. 1.4, about 14 millimeters either side. So the procedural track is set to the standard Trainz width, and so I followed that. I went back. So I retrofitted or I redid all of the crossovers. For example, this is the latest version of my 60-degree crossover for the dock rails, allowing for the slight change in the gauge, correction of the gauge. I mean, they looked okay before, they look okay now. It's just that you'll see when I show you in Trainz, they actually do all now marry up. Because let's go to Trainz. So here is an example of lots of dock rail, and you'll see here actually I've got a mix of the fixed track elements, that is those non-animated turnouts. This is for pre-Trainz 2019. Non-animated turnouts set at 30 degrees, which you need to wire up. And we've got left, right, we've got a 3-way and a Y. And also those are the crossovers there. Look, there's a couple of crossovers, and there's some bits of fixed track length. I've actually reduced the length of this one from 1.73 meters to 1.53 meters, and the same is true with these double track spacers basically. And you'll see there's all sorts of odds and ends I put in here. This is while I was experimenting. So what have we actually got here? Let's have a look at what we've actually got. Well, here's a good example. So here's our track, our ordinary track, and you can see that there is a change just there. You can see that because there's slightly dark, more of a dark section there, and I've left that deliberately, and that's because these are actually two different types of track. This one here is the non-procedural track. So if I just add some of that, that's there. And then this bit here is the procedural track. And so I wasn't too worried about changes in the slight look there. In fact, I wanted something so I could visually, I would know, and indeed anybody else who's laying the track would know, that this is the non-procedural track and this is the procedural track. And they look very, very similar, but not absolutely the same. But they're certainly similar enough for using on a dock layout. And just to show you that it really is procedural track, let's just bring that down to there. Let's take some more and let's bring it in and make a junction. And there we are. And that's the junction. And we immediately see the reason why I started doing the cobble rousing cobbles as non-procedural track, because the red spline point indicates that it can't display itself properly because the angle is too sharp, too severe. So, and just to show that that is the case, I'm just going to move this over until we lose that red. And now we've lost it, and because we've lost it, we've now got the frog is in place and the rouser in place. Even then it's a little bit too much. Okay, I'm not sure even that we had frogs appearing in dock rails, but I'm going to live with that. And just to show that it really is animated, there we are, and let's zoom in a bit. You can see it's actually animated. I kept it fairly tight. But of course, if we were to add the ordinary dock rails to this one up here, I'm running out of space, aren't I? Let's put it in on this one. Then we just get the usual pre-procedural, non-animated, and you can see there that on that track I get that flicker, but it does settle down. On this one we also get the flicker. There we are, as we move about, as it redraws itself. But I reckon for procedural track, it's not bad. Procedural dock track. So here's another example of that. Where are we? Here we are. Here's a red procedural track junction that is trying to display the correct frog, and even then I think we can have problems. No, it's not gonna do it. And of course that's one of the issues that I've sort of been considering about. Maybe there we are, look, it's a bit better, isn't it? We've got the frog and we got the wing rails there. And that's one of the things that I've been considering, the reason why I did these non-animated tight turnouts, 30-degree turnouts, extreme turnouts, for the dock track, because the procedural track has difficulty in handling the sort of very, very tight curves, the very, very abrupt and sharp curves that you get on dock railways. Now, just like anything else, just like all the rest for the dock railways, what you have to do, of course, is you've got to drop the spline points down, and we've got the red back. So what we need to do here is we also need to drop anything that connects with the procedural track which is not at the same height. Now we are there, look. So that influences the any procedural track turnouts. In fact, it's not even done it properly yet because I've got to lower the three-way point. That should do it, I think. We should have that. Yeah, now we can see all of the procedural track laid out. Another thing I've found is that, especially with procedural track, the repeat of the texture can change quite a bit when you're using very short pieces. So we've got these much bigger cobbles here, which isn't very satisfactory, but I haven't found a way of getting rid of it. And the only way really is to spread it out. But where you've got short sections, maybe that's a good idea then to use the where are we? To use the non-procedural dock rails. Oh, that's at -25, so we're there. So there's not much more I can do with that. Let's have a look here. Let's drop this down and this down. So there we are. I think that that's a reasonable selection of dock side rail. Oh, I'm in the wrong one there. Where am I? Dock wall concrete. No, I want dock. Where are we? Dock rail cobbles. That's the one to put underneath. Take the scale down. The radius is whatever you want, and just splurge a load of cobbles. Let's just do that. Just have a look. And this is why I prefer this type of doing the dock rails in this way, rather than simply putting rails only down. I mean, it's just me because I'm a track freak, and I really, the best thing that could happen as far as I'm concerned was that we got procedural track, because it meant that turnouts began to look like turnouts, and we didn't have to make up for the lack of that by making our own animated points, which were great. I mean, you know, AJS's stuff, absolutely brilliant. I just about got broad gauge track points working, but I'm very pleased to have broad gauge procedural track because it makes life so much easier. So there we are. So let's have a look. Let's stick a loco in there on a bit of track, and then we'll have a look in driver and see what. There's the pug. Let's stick the pug in. That's always a good one. There we are. And let's have a look in driver. Save it. Yeah, I don't mind. It's just a show. Okay, and we'll go into free roaming, and also I think high junction overlays. And actually what I would do is I would change the point levers to invisible ones. So there we are. So that's the effect, and the reason why I do this is because the cobbles within rails laid in the inside harbours tend to follow the run of the rails, and cobbles which were used just for general roadways, floorings, pavements had their own geometry. So that's why we've got these at an angle, and if we just put rails only in, they would follow the geometry of these cobbles, the texture cobbles, rather than the geometry of the rails themselves. You probably think I'm just a pedant, or a, you know, got nothing better to do than faff about with this, but to me the track's really important. You can see there it's not comfortable. I'm not comfortable with that, but there's not a lot I can do about it. Let's just, these are the ones that I've set down 0.25 meters, so let's just go down. Okay, we're at ground level, so we're still up a bit, we're still up above the surface. This, you know, if you were at the docker you'd be tripping over these all the time, but well, I can't really get many lower without the whole thing being a problem. I did try lowering them to 30, so it's not this one but this one. You can see this is actually standing proud of the cobbles. If you look round, look at, watch it on the, let me see if I can slow that a bit. Yeah, you can see it's actually floating above the ground ground texture, so these need lowering. But this one here, let's go in a bit there. Am I getting a bit closer? Let's have a look. What am I doing here? I hope I knew what I was doing, even in a sort of basic Trainz way. Get a bit closer. Okay, let's drop down. So you can see in dropping down that these look part of this. These float above. That's why I'm saying drop them down by 1/4 of a meter. 0.25 of a meter. 11.974 inches. 749. Anyway, about 11 3/4 inches. Because that's that's what I finally worked out what it was. And because the track has been lowered, the lever, the base of the lever, which you would normally have on the surface. Let's see if we can find one. There we are. There's a created by the procedural track, and it's sticking up. So all that bit has floated underneath as the spline is lowered. I don't like that. If I could find a way of curing that, I'd be very pleased. But the problem is that the track is the solid cobbles and it overlays here, and the chairs are the side cobbles and they overlay each other in several places. And I couldn't think of a way of doing it so that the ones going straight ahead would be at one height and the ones turning off would be another, because that's just not the way procedural track works. So I thought, right, okay, I'm going to live with that. It's annoying, but for the sake of having procedural track for the docks, I'm happy with that. I'm happy, but quite prepared to put up with it. So I'm not going to send our little tug going anywhere. So this is very much to illustrate the work I've been doing for the procedural track, which has been a real headache in many ways. And it also means that these, for example, these crossings are now, which are floating above the ground at the moment because I didn't lower them, but they also now marry up with the procedural track and with the non-procedural track, so you don't have to use the procedural track. But I will, on my next website update, I will change all of my non-animated pre-procedural turnouts to this version 2 here that you see here. So if you've already downloaded them and you want to use the procedural track, then you should re-download and let them overwrite the earlier version. If you don't want to use procedural track, don't worry. The previous version works fine, and the difference in the gauge is so tiny that you wouldn't really notice it. It's only when it's lined up with the procedural track that you notice there's a sort of a change of gauge of about, it's just about 2.8 centimeters, which is I suppose an inch, but you know, what's an inch in Trainz? Doesn't really matter. So there we are. I hope that's been of interest. I hope you will download and use my procedural track dock rails in cobbles, and I'm not saying it's going to make pretty turnouts, but it will make turnouts. And if you use it carefully and judiciously and mix it with the non-procedural stuff, then I think you can get quite a decent dockyard layout, track the dockyard layout working very well indeed. And of course this is all designed for the Liverpool Overhead Railway project. Tons and tons and tons of stuff to do yet on that, but I just wanted to take some time out from the buildings to produce track which I thought would look quite nice coming out of Waterloo Road goods depot, heading across the road, across some cobbles and on towards the terminus at Riverside, Liverpool Riverside terminus, where the great liners would dock for their transatlantic journeys. And that's going to be quite a project building that, because there's the landing stage, Prince's Landing Stage, there's Prince's Dock, as well as the Riverside station terminus as well. And I've received quite a lot of information for that, including some excellent photographs from Liverpool Museum, some really helpful stuff, and that'll all be for the future. So there we are. Procedural track in cobbles lines up with the non-procedural track and the fixed track elements, and we should be ready for download. The next update of my website probably sometime about mid-March, I would guess that, 2021. Any queries, any questions, any comments, any remarks, very welcome indeed to post them up. Please subscribe to my channel. I've had a few more subscriptions recently, and it's very encouraging when people do subscribe, because it encourages me to make more of these videos.